The Volkov family Christmas was held every year at my parents' house in Connecticut, a colonial on 2 acres, the kind of house that looks different in winter than in any other season, the kind that accumulates meaning through repetition until the house and the occasion become the same thing in memory. My mother had been hosting it for 28 years. She had opinions about the centerpiece. She had opinions about the order of dishes. She had, over 2 decades of practice, refined the event into something that functioned whether or not any individual member of the family was in a cooperative mood. Which was useful. Because my brother Nikolai was rarely in a cooperative mood at Christmas. He arrived at 4 in the afternoon with his wife, Cassandra, and their 2 children, and he was already in the specific register he occupied when he had been traveling, slightly compressed, slightly sharp, the version of himself that had not yet unwound from the demands of being publicly successful and privately impatient. Nikolai was 39 years old. He ran a private equity firm in New York that had done well by any external measure. He wore the success in the way of men who have worked very hard for something and want it to be visible, not from vanity exactly, but from the need for the record to be accurate. He was my older brother by 4 years. We had not always been like this. The distance between Nikolai and me had been accumulating for most of the past decade, deposited in small increments that were individually unremarkable and collectively significant. It had not begun with a single event. It had begun, as these things usually do, with a divergence, the point at which 2 people who started from the same place chose different directions and began, without intending to become legible to each other in entirely different ways. Nikolai had chosen the legible path. The visible one. The path that translated directly into the language families use to account for their members, success, money, position, the specific shorthand of the dinner table where accomplishment is tallied and compared and assigned value. I had chosen a different kind of work. I was a forensic accountant, not the television version, not the dramatic courtroom version, the real version, which looked, from the outside, like a great deal of time spent with documents. It looked like spreadsheets and paper trails and long days in rooms with no windows. It looked, to my family, like something adjacent to accounting, which they associated with quietness and competence but not with consequence. What it was, in practice, was the slow, systematic excavation of financial truth from records that had been constructed to obscure it. I had spent 15 years working primarily with federal agencies, the FBI, the SEC, the DOJ, on cases involving fraud at scale. The kind of fraud that moves through legitimate-seeming infrastructure for years, sometimes decades, before the thread is found. My job was to find the thread. I was good at it. I did not discuss it at Christmas. Not because I was protecting classified information, most of what I worked on became public eventually, the names and the cases landing in the financial press long after I had moved to the next file. I didn't discuss it because the work itself resisted the compression required for dinner conversation. Because explaining what I actually did required explaining how financial fraud actually worked, which required dismantling assumptions that people had held for years, which required more of everyone's evening than anyone wanted to spend. And because Nikolai's version of my career, she's in accounting, something like that, she does financial work, had been established long ago and he had never found sufficient reason to revise it, and I had never provided him with one. That had been my choice. Made deliberately. It seemed, by December of that year, like a choice worth reconsidering. My grandfather, Viktor Alexandrovich Volkov, was 81 years old. He was driving himself to Connecticut from Massachusetts, which was a thing he was still permitted to do and which every person in the family monitored with varying degrees of visible anxiety. He was expected by 5. At 4:45 my mother checked her phone. At 5 she checked again. I was in the kitchen with my mother and her sister, Aunt Ludmilla, helping with the salads, which was where I preferred to be in the early hours of these events, useful, peripheral, in a position to observe the room without being its subject. The kitchen had a window that looked over the driveway. I was watching through it, intermittently, while cutting vegetables. My grandfather had been many things in his life, in the order they had occurred, a boy in post-war Leningrad who grew up eating what was available rather than what was wanted, A student who had demonstrated, in the specific way of Soviet-era students, an aptitude for mathematics and systems that the state had promptly and efficiently redirected toward military application, an officer who had served across 3 decades and 4 theaters, a general who had retired with 4 stars and a reputation built on the kind of decisions that looked, in retrospect, obvious, and which had been, in the moment, anything but. He had come to America in 1994 with my grandmother, who died 11 years later, and had remained. He lived in Cambridge. He had learned English to fluency in his 60s, which he mentioned occasionally and with justifiable satisfaction. He read 2 newspapers a day in 2 languages. He had opinions about geopolitics that were informed and measured and which he deployed sparingly, having spent a career in environments where opinions had operational consequences. He had taught me chess when I was 6 years old. He had taught Nikolai chess at the same time. Nikolai had been bored by it. I had not. That, in the way of things, had told us both something. Dinner was at 6:30, the table seated 12 when fully extended. My parents at the heads. Nikolai and Cassandra on one side with their children, Thomas, 11, and Irina, 8. My aunt and uncle on the other side. My grandfather at the corner, the position that allowed him to see most of the table, which he had occupied at every family dinner for as long as I could remember, and which I had always understood was not accidental. I was beside him. The early part of dinner moved in the way of Volkov family dinners, the required accounting of the year, structured loosely by my mother's questions, moving around the table. Nikolai talked about the firm, a significant close, an expansion into a new sector, the specific language of people who understand that their work is measured in numbers and have become fluent in presenting those numbers as narrative. Cassandra talked about their renovation. My aunt and uncle talked about their grandchildren, who were not present. My mother asked me about my year. It was good, I said. Busy. What are you working on? She asked. A few things, I said. Ongoing, mostly. This was true and not evasive. Ongoing cases were ongoing. The compression required to explain them in the space of a dinner conversation was not available. Nikolai was cutting his meat. Ongoing, he said. Not a question. The specific tone of observation that isn't quite mockery but contains the shape of it. I looked at him. He didn't look up. My grandfather was eating quietly beside me, in the manner of a man who is monitoring several conversations simultaneously and has not yet decided whether to enter any of them. The remark came at 7:15, during the pause between the main course and dessert. My father had gone to the kitchen to help my mother with something. Aunt Ludmilla was in the other room with the children. The table had contracted to Nikolai, Cassandra, my uncle, my grandfather, and me, the specific configuration that precedes family events going either way, toward warmth or toward the kind of conversation that is remembered afterward for the wrong reasons. Nikolai had refilled his wine. He was talking to my uncle about something, a mutual acquaintance, a shared context I was half following, and then, in the specific way of pivots that are not entirely accidental, the conversation turned. Masha, he said. This was his name for me since childhood, from Maria, which was my full name, which almost no one used. I looked at him. I've been thinking about this for a while, he said. And I think you need to hear it. This was a sentence structure I recognized. It was the structure of unsolicited honesty, the kind that uses the language of care as a delivery mechanism for something the speaker wants to say for their own reasons. All right, I said. He leaned forward slightly. You're talented, he said. You've always been talented, but I look at your life and I think, Masha, you could have done something. You're 40 years old. You're still in the same position, the same work, and nothing changes. You disappear for months at a time and when you come back you can't even explain what you were doing. Nobody knows what you do. Nobody can point to something and say, that was her. That matters. You're. He paused. You're a nobody in your field, he said. And I think you know it. And I think it's not too late to do something about it, but you're running out of time. The table was very quiet. My uncle was studying his napkin. Cassandra had the expression of a woman who had heard the setup to this before and had been hoping, without conviction, that the conclusion would be different. My grandfather had set down his fork. I held my glass of water and looked at my brother. There was a great deal I could have said. I did not say it. "Thank you," I said, "for the thought." Nikolai nodded. He seemed, having said it, to feel better. The compressed quality that had arrived with him from New York had released slightly. The conversation moved. My grandfather picked up his fork. Under the table, he put his hand briefly on my arm, a pressure, a weight, the specific gesture of a man who has decided something but has not yet decided when to act on it. I recognized the gesture. I had seen it before, on other people, in other contexts. It meant, wait. The dessert was my mother's charlotte, an apple charlotte she made from her mother's recipe, which had come from her mother's mother, which placed its origins somewhere in the late 19th century and which had survived everything that the 20th century had brought to the family without modification. My mother considered modifying it. She considered it every year and decided against it every year, which was, she had told me once, the point. The children came back to the table for dessert. Thomas, Nikolai's 11-year-old, sat next to me. He was a serious child, quiet in the way of children who are paying more attention than the adults around them realize. He had, over the past 2 or 3 years, developed the habit of finding me at family gatherings and asking questions. Not social questions. Real ones. "Aunt Masha," he said, while the charlotte was being served. "Yes. What do you actually do?" He said it the way children say things, direct, without the social wrapping adults put around genuine questions, the wrapping that sometimes obscures whether the question is real. "What do you mean?" I said. "Dad said you do financial work," he said. "But that doesn't really explain it." "Like, what do you do?" I looked at him. "I follow money," I said. "When someone has done something dishonest, hidden money, stolen it, moved it somewhere it shouldn't be, I find the trail they left. Even when they tried to erase it. Especially when they tried to erase it." He considered this. "Like a detective," he said. "Something like that," I said. "For numbers instead of people." "What happens when you find it?" "The people who should know about it, I said. "And then consequences follow." "What kind of consequences?" "Depends on what they did," I said. "Sometimes civil. Sometimes criminal. Sometimes someone goes to prison for a very long time." He was quiet for a moment. "Is it hard?" he said. "To find it?" "The hiding is sophisticated," I said. "It's designed to look like everything is correct. The trick is finding the thing that's almost correct. The thing that's slightly off." He thought about this with the full attention of a child who has decided something is interesting. "Have you found a lot of them?" he said. "Yes," I said. "Big ones?" I thought about the question. "Some of them were big, yes," I said. He nodded. "Cool," he said, and moved on to his charlotte with the efficiency of an 11-year-old who has gotten the information he came for. Across the table, Nikolai was watching. He had heard the exchange. His expression was unreadable in the way of a person recalibrating in real time, adjusting a picture that had just shifted slightly, not yet sure where the new frame belongs. I looked back at my dessert. After the charlotte, the family dispersed in the way of post-dinner family gatherings, the children to other rooms, the adults to the living room and the kitchen, the specific social gravity of these events that pulls people into smaller groups. I helped my mother carry plates. My grandfather found me in the kitchen. He came in the way he always moved, without announcement, without the shuffling quality that age sometimes brought to movement, still with the specific unhurried deliberateness of a man who has never confused slow with aimless. He was in his jacket. He had not removed it, which for him was a sign of something. He had opinions about jackets and the messages conveyed by their removal. "Come outside," he said. We went out the back door onto the small porch that my parents had added 10 years ago, 2 chairs, a low table, the specific cold of a Connecticut December that was sharp without being brutal. He sat. I sat. For a moment he looked at the yard. Your brother, he said. Yes, I said. He believes what he says, my grandfather said. That's not the same as being right. I know. He turned to look at me. In his 80s, his face had become more itself, the features that had always been there became, with age, more fully visible. He had the eyes of a man who had spent 60 years making assessments and had learned to trust them. Tell me one thing, he said. Something you worked on. Something real. I looked at him. I knew what he was asking. Not for the compressed version, not for the family dinner version, not for the abstracted story of someone who does financial work. The real thing. There was a case 2 years ago, I said. A fund administrator in New Jersey. The fund managed money for municipal pension systems, teachers, police, firefighters. Over 11 years, the administrator had been diverting funds. Small amounts, systematically, through a structure that was designed to look like standard operational costs. How much, my grandfather said. Over the period, approximately $230 million. He was quiet. The audits missed it, I said. For 11 years. The accounting was technically correct at every level that was reviewed. The structure was built to present correctly to every standard instrument of oversight. There was a single discrepancy, a timing difference in how certain expenses were recognized, a pattern that only became visible when you looked across all 11 years simultaneously rather than year by year. You found it, he said. I found it. How long did it take? 14 months, I said. The initial referral to conviction. He was quiet again. The cold settled around us. The people whose pensions it was, he said. The pension systems have been in recovery proceedings, I said. It will take years. Not everyone will be made whole. But the losses are documented now. The responsibility is established. That part is done. My grandfather was looking at the yard. Do they know? He said. The teachers. The police. The firefighters. Do they know your name? No, I said. They never will, he said. It was not a question. Probably not, I said. That's not how it works. He nodded slowly. I know how it works, he said. I have spent my life in work like this. The kind of work where the outcome is visible and the person who made it possible is not. This is a specific discipline. Not everyone can do it. He turned and looked at me again. Masha, he said, yes. I want to tell you something. I have wanted to tell you for a long time. I have not found the right occasion. I waited. When you were 7 years old, he said, I was teaching you chess. Your brother sat across from you and was already bored, and I watched you look at the board, and I saw it. The thing I had spent years looking for in officers and finding rarely. The ability to hold the whole position in your mind at once. Not just where you are. Where you will be. Where everything will be. He paused. I thought then, this one. This one is the one. The cold was very still around us. Not Nikolai, he said. Not because he is less, he is what he is, and what he is has value, but in him I saw a man who would be successful. In you I saw something rarer. A person built for a specific kind of truth. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that has to be found. He put his hand on my arm again. The same gesture as at the table, but now completed, now the full weight of what it had been holding. $230 million, he said. 11 years. Found in 14 months. By you. Alone, I assume, or nearly. Nearly, I said. Nobody knows your name, he said. Nobody knows my name. He was quiet. Good, he said. I looked at him. Good? I said. The best work, he said, is the work that doesn't need your name attached to it to be real. Your brother's work needs his name. The numbers on his firm's reports are meaningless without Nikolai Volkov's name beneath them. That is a different kind of work. Valid. But different. He stood slowly, with the particular deliberateness of a man who has decided to economize his body's efforts. What you found, he said, exists whether or not you receive credit for finding it. The pension administrators who will recover their funds. The teachers who will not lose everything they saved. They do not know your name and they will benefit from your work. That is not nothing, Masha. That is everything. He looked at me for a long moment. I am very proud of you, he said. I have been proud of you for a long time. He went back inside. I sat in the cold for a moment, then followed. The living room had reconfigured while we were outside. My parents on the sofa. Aunt Ludmilla in the armchair. Cassandra on the other end of the sofa. The children somewhere else in the house, the specific muffled sounds of children who have found something to do. Nikolai was standing near the window with a glass of wine. My grandfather walked into the living room and stood at the center of it. This was unusual. My grandfather did not position himself at the center of rooms. He positioned himself at the edges, the corners, the places from which everything was visible. To stand at the center of a room meant he had decided something was worth addressing directly, which happened rarely enough that when it happened the room noticed. It noticed now. My father looked up. My mother looked up. Nikolai turned from the window. I want to say something, my grandfather said. He said it in the particular quiet of a man who does not need volume because he has never needed it, the voice that commanded attention not through force but through the simple mechanism of always having something worth attending to. The room was very quiet. I have been in this family for a long time, he said. I have been in it through many conversations at many tables over many years. I have listened to these conversations. I have not always participated. I chose this. He looked around the room. Tonight I heard something at that table, he said. I heard a man tell a woman that she is nobody. A man who loves his sister, I believe this, tell her that she is nobody in her field. Invisible. Without consequence. Nikolai's expression had changed. Grandfather, he started. I did not ask to be interrupted, my grandfather said. Not sharp. Simply factual. Nikolai stopped. I spent 40 years, my grandfather said, in service. I spent 40 years learning to evaluate people, not by what they said about themselves, not by the accounts given by others, not by position or title or the volume of their social presence. I learned to evaluate people by the nature of their work and the quality of their judgment and the specific character visible in how they conducted themselves when no audience was present. He paused. I am going to tell this family something about Maria's work, he said. I am going to tell you one case. One. Because one is sufficient. And he told them what I had told him, not the whole of it, not the technical architecture, but the shape of it, 11 years, a structure designed to deceive, $230 million, 14 months, pension systems, teachers and police and firefighters who would recover losses they did not yet know had been recovered. He told it in the manner of a man who has spent a career briefing rooms, the clean line of it, no wasted words, the specific sentences that carry weight because they have been chosen rather than assembled. The room was completely still. My father was looking at me. My mother had her hand over her mouth. Cassandra was watching Nikolai. Nikolai was looking at the floor. When my grandfather finished, he said one more thing. Your sister, he said to Nikolai, has spent 15 years doing work that most people in her field cannot do. Work that requires a kind of intelligence that is not visible at dinner tables. Work that has consequences for real people who will never know her name. He paused. She is not a nobody in her field. She is, in the most accurate meaning of the word, irreplaceable. He looked at Nikolai for a long moment, then he sat back down in his chair. The room held the silence for several seconds. Then my mother said something about coffee, and the silence broke, and the room began again. Nikolai found me in the hallway at 9:30. The children were being put to bed. My parents and aunt and uncle had moved to the kitchen. The house had the specific texture of a gathering winding down, the quieting, the gathering of coats and bags, the shift from present tense to past. He came to stand beside me. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't know, he said. No, I said. Why didn't you? Because it's not dinner table material, I said. Because explaining it requires dismantling things. Because it's easier to let people have their version and do the work anyway. He was quiet. Is it always like that? He said. Cases like that? The scale varies, I said. The structure is similar. He turned to look at me. 14 months, he said. 14 months. Alone. Nearly. He shook his head once, the movement of a man who is adjusting something significant and doing it honestly rather than quickly. I have spent 10 years telling myself you were, he stopped, underperforming, I offered. Something like that. He looked at me. I think I needed you to be. I considered this. I know, I said. He stopped again. That's not. It's what it is, I said. It's not unusual. He was quiet for a moment. Nobody, he said. I said nobody. At the table. Yes. In front of everyone. Yes. Including him. I said nothing. He ran a hand through his hair. Masha, he said. Yes. I'm sorry. What I said was wrong. Not just wrong, it was. I know what it was, I said. I'm sorry. I looked at him. He was, I believed, genuinely in this, not the social version of an apology, the one that functions to close a discomfort, but the real one, which is uncomfortable by nature and does not resolve neatly. Thank you, I said. That's it, he said. What else do you want? He thought about this. I don't know, he said. I expected more of a fight. I don't fight about things I already know, I said. He looked at me. He said that, Nikolai said. Grandfather. He said something like that once. Years ago. He was quiet. You are like him. I learned from him, I said. He nodded slowly. He's proud of you, Nikolai said. I know. Does that matter to you? What he thinks? I thought about the honest answer. Yes, I said. Not because I needed it. But because it came from someone whose judgment I trust. That means something different from approval. Approval you can get from anyone. Judgment from someone who has spent 60 years learning to evaluate things accurately, that means something. He was quiet. I want to understand what you do, he said. I want to actually understand it. Not the version I've had. That would require time, I said. And more than one conversation. I have time, he said. I looked at him. We'll start with the structure of a layered scheme, I said. The basic architecture. Next time you visit. He nodded. Next time I visit, he said. We stood in the hallway for another moment, in the specific quiet of siblings who have been a long way from each other and are standing at the early edge of something that might become different. Then Thomas appeared from the other end of the hallway, in pajamas, looking for his father. Dad, he said. Irina took my book. The ordinary resumed, as it does, and we followed it back into the life of the house. I sat with my grandfather for an hour after the others had gone to bed. This was our tradition, not stated, not arranged, but consistent for as long as I could remember. The house settling around us. The last of the tea. The specific quality of a room that has held a family through an evening and is now quiet. He did not say much. He asked about 2 cases, obliquely, without names, cases that had been in the financial press, that he would have recognized. I confirmed or denied in the way we spoke about these things, the shorthand we had developed over years. At some point I said, you didn't have to do that. Tonight. What you said. He considered this. No, he said. Why did you? He was quiet for a moment. Because I have watched you carry that conversation for a long time, he said. 10 years of Nikolai at the table, and 10 years of you holding the full picture while he held a partial one, and 10 years of you deciding not to correct it. He looked at me. That requires great patience. It wasn't patience, I said. It was indifference. Or close to it. Even so, he said, there is a cost to being seen incorrectly, even when you don't need the correction. There is a weight to it. I have felt it myself. He paused. Tonight it seemed to me that the weight had gotten heavy enough. And that I could do something about it. I looked at him. You were watching for it, I said. I am always watching, he said. Simply. I thought about this. Thank you, I said. He nodded. We finished our tea. Outside, the snow that had been threatening all evening had finally begun to fall, quietly, without announcement, the specific late-night snow that accumulates while everyone is sleeping and changes the shape of everything by morning. I watched it through the window. He will actually try, my grandfather said. Nikolai. He is not a bad man. He is a man who has been wrong for a long time and is now in the process of finding this out. That is uncomfortable. He will need time. I know, I said. You will give him the time. Yes. He nodded. And the work, he said. The cases, they continue. They continue, I said. Good. He was quiet. The world requires people who can do what you do. Not many can. The ones who can must continue. He stood. Sleep well, Masha. Sleep well. He went down the hallway toward the guest room, and the house was quiet around me, and outside the snow came down on the Volkov family's Connecticut Christmas in the soundless way of things that change everything slowly, over the course of a night. The next morning, Thomas was the first one up. He came downstairs in his pajamas and found me at the kitchen table with my coffee and my laptop, the habit I had never successfully left behind, the early hours being the hours when the mind was cleanest for the kind of reading the work required. He looked at the screen. Is that a case? He said. Background reading, I said. He poured himself a glass of orange juice and sat down across from me. Aunt Masha, he said. Yes. My dad told me last night, after you all talked. He told me a little bit. About the case. The pension one. He looked at me. He said it was important. It was important, I said. Thomas paused. He seemed surprised. Like he was hearing something for the first time. He was, I said. Thomas considered this. Did you know, he said. That he didn't know? Yes, I said. And you didn't tell him? No. He thought about this with the full seriousness of an 11-year-old. Why not? I looked at him. Because his knowing was never what the work was for, I said. The work was for the people whose money was taken. Whether Nikolai knew about it or didn't, the outcome was the same. The work was the same. Thomas turned this over. But it would have felt better, he said. If he knew. Maybe, I said. Or maybe it would have become about that. About whether he understood, whether he approved, whether the number was impressive enough. That's a different kind of work. A different kind of motivation. He was quiet. Which is better, he said. Neither is better, I said. They're different. Some people need the external, the recognition, the visible success. It functions as fuel. There's nothing wrong with it. I paused. For me it's always been the other kind. The work holds its own weight. I don't need to add anything to it. He looked at his juice. I don't know which kind I am, he said. You're 11, I said. You don't need to know yet. He almost smiled. Do you think, he started. Yes? I said. Do you think you could teach me? What you do? Not everything. Just how you look at things. How you find the thing that's slightly off. I looked at him. It takes years to learn, I said. I know, he said. I have years. He said it the way children say things that are actually true, without the weight adults bring to truth, which is the weight of knowing it will be tested. He had years. Start with this, I said. I turned the laptop. Tell me what you see. He leaned in. Outside, the snow from the night before lay undisturbed over the yard, over the edges of trees, over the quiet expanse of a Connecticut morning that looked different, as my mother's Charlotte never did, from everything that had come before it. 3 months later, Nikolai came to New York for what he called a proper visit. He stayed for a weekend. We walked, ate, argued in the productive way of two people who are actually trying to understand each other, which is a different kind of argument from the kind they had been having for 10 years. I explained the architecture of a layered scheme. He asked better questions than I expected. On the last evening he asked me something I hadn't expected. Do you ever think about the work differently now? Since Christmas? I thought about this. No, I said. The work is what it always was. But, he paused. But something changed. With us? Yes, I said. Something changed with us. Was that? He looked for the words. Was that worth more or less than you thought it would be? I considered the honest answer. I didn't think about it in those terms, I said. I didn't think it would happen. So I didn't have an expectation to measure it against. He nodded slowly. I'm glad it did, he said. So am I said. And I meant it, not as a replacement for anything, not as a resolution that explained the preceding 10 years, but as a thing that had its own value, separate from what had come before and from what the work was and from everything my grandfather had said in the living room on Christmas night. A different thing. A new thing. Standing in the specific territory of two people who have been a long way apart and have, slowly, begun the work of finding their way to something else. My grandfather called on the following Saturday, at 9 in the morning. He called every Saturday, which I had come to rely on in the way of reliable things, the structure of the week, the shape of the morning, the voice that said Masha and meant the whole of its history. How is the work? He said. The work is good, I said. And Nikolai? He's trying, I said. Good, he said. That's what trying looks like from the outside. He asked about Thomas. He wants to learn, I said. I know, my grandfather said. I spoke to him. You spoke to Thomas? We had a telephone call, he said. He had questions. I had time. I sat with this for a moment. What did you tell him? I said. I told him what I told you, my grandfather said. When you were learning to see the whole board. I said, the pieces matter less than the space between them. The move you make matters less than the position you're creating. You must be able to hold what is and what will be simultaneously, without confusing them. Did he understand? I said. He is 11, my grandfather said. He understood enough. The rest will come. There was a pause. You are well, he said. I am well, I said. Good. A pause. The work continues. The work continues. Then everything is as it should be, he said. We talked for another 20 minutes, about nothing specific and about everything, the particular texture of Saturday morning conversations with someone who has known you since before you knew yourself, the shorthand of decades that allows a great deal to be said in very little space. When we said goodbye, I sat for a while with the phone on the table and the coffee going slightly cold and the morning arranged around me, the quiet of a workday that was also a day off, the particular light of late winter moving toward spring, the sense of a year that had changed enough to feel different from this angle. The work was on the table. A new file. A new thread. The beginning of something that would take months, possibly longer, and that would yield its truth in the particular way truth yielded in this field, slowly, incrementally, in the finding of the thing that was almost right and therefore wrong. I opened it. The work began. Which had always been, in the end, the only beginning that mattered.